After Bill Clinton was elected President of the United States in 1992, he appointed Lloyd Bentsen as his Treasury Secretary, meaning that Bentsen had to vacate his U.S. Senate seat from Texas. This meant that Texas Governor Ann Richards had to appoint his replacement until a special election was called. Up to this time, Richards was a strong supporter of Bill Clinton and gave two of the most impressive convention speeches at both the 1988 and 1992 Democratic National Conventions. Therefore, Clinton and Richards were somewhat connected at the hip. Richards appointed Bob Kruger, who was the Railroad Commissioner of Texas, to the U.S. Senate with the first round of the special election to replace Bentsen on May 1, 1993. By that time, Clinton had become quite unpopular. In April, Clinton's approval rating was at 55% according to Gallup, but by the time May came around, Clinton's approval rating had dropped to 44%. The special election for the U.S. Senate was seen as a referendum on the Clinton administration, similar to Harris Wofford's election in 1991, which I talk about in this video about Clinton. But it wasn't just a referendum on Clinton, but on Ann Richards as well. In addition to the U.S. Senate race, a statewide education funding amendment was on the ballot. The goal of the amendment was to equalize public school funding by allowing regional sharing of property tax revenues, which would have consolidated many school districts. For many, this was seen as a consolidation of public schools by the state, taking away local control, resulting in the state bureaucrats handing down mandates to the local schools. The amendment would lose by 20%, and Bob Kruger only won 29% of the vote in the first round of the U.S. Senate special election, finishing 99 votes behind the Treasurer of Texas, Kay Bailey Hutchinson. 1 month later, and Clinton's national approval rating now down to 37%, which would be the lowest of his presidency, Hutchinson would solidly defeat Kruger by 32.68% in the runoff. These massive defeats showed that Ann Richards, as well as a number of Texas Democrats, were vulnerable in 1994. Later that year, on November 8th of 1993, the son of the former president announced that he was running to replace Richards. This is the story of the 1994 Texas gubernatorial election between Democrat Ann Richards and Republican George W. Bush. Hello everybody, my name is Dave and welcome to Election History. I do videos about campaigns, elections, candidates, political parties, and the likes. If you like these types of videos, please subscribe to the channel and press the thumbs up button. If you would like to support the channel even further, you can do so by becoming a Patreon member with the link below in the description. As you may know from some of my recent videos, YouTube likes to either demonetize my videos or restrict advertising on them. So if you would like to help keep the channel going, please join my Patreon. Also, I do Patreon-only post-production videos where I talk about my most recent videos and what I learned from those videos. So again, thank you all that make this channel possible, from my subscribers to my Patreon members. And with that, let's go into today's video about the 1994 Texas gubernatorial election. On June 10, 1989, Richards, who was the Texas state treasurer at the time, announced that she was running for governor of Texas in 1990. The main focus of her campaign was on education funding, saying to a crowd in Waco, her hometown, quote, "It isn't so much that we are not moving ahead so much as we are standing still. What happens when we stand still is that other states progress ahead of us. I don't want my kids to have to move to California or Massachusetts because they can't find a job because they want an education." End of quote. Her main opposition was from Texas Attorney General Jim Maddox and former Texas Governor Mark White. The campaign was extremely dirty on all sides. White, who was probably the most conservative of the three, boasted about the 22 executions that had happened under his watch while he was governor. But the Richards campaign ran an ad accusing White of lining his pockets with taxpayers' money, stating that after he left as governor, which paid him $93,000 a year, he bought a mansion in Houston worth $1.3 million. These charges were false, but enough to knock White out of the first round primary, with Richards winning 39% to Maddox's 38.7% and White's 19.4%. After his defeat, White compared Ann Richards' campaign to Heinrich Himmler, saying that the way that she ran her campaign would make Himmler blush. But at the same time that Richard was attacking White, Maddox was attacking Richards. Prior to the first round, Maddox said that Richards, who publicly admitted that she was a recovering alcoholic, had also done mind-altering drugs while she was an alcoholic. Maddox even went as far as saying that he had witnesses that had signed statements attesting to Richards' drug use. At the same time, Richards went after Maddox, saying that he was too profiting from public service funds and challenged Maddox to release his tax records, something Richards did back when she announced in 1989. Both would charge each other of smoking marijuana in the past, and remember, this was the I didn't inhale era. And with both candidates being quite liberal on the issues, this primarily just became a personality battle, a battle in which Ann Richards won 57.1% of the votes to Maddox's 42.9%. In the general, Richards took on eccentric businessman Clayton Williams. Throughout most of the general election, Williams was ahead of Richards, with a poll in August showing Williams up by 11% on Richards, well outside the poll's 3.5 margin of error. This was even after Williams had made jokes about rape earlier in the campaign, saying, quote, "If it's inevitable, just relax and enjoy it," end of quote. The only way for Richards to claw back was by having debates, which Williams reluctantly agreed to. In the person-to-person debate, Williams refused to shake Richards' hand. During the debate, Williams made one gaffe after another, such as saying that he had voted for the only constitutional amendment on the ballot, yet he didn't know what it did. With each passing day, Richards came off as tough and knowledgeable, while Williams continued to flounder on the issues impacting the state. In the last poll conducted before Election Day, Richards was 4% behind Williams, with Williams at 45% to Richards' 41%. Richards would go on to win the election with 49.5% of the vote to Williams' 46.9% of the votes, with Richards winning both Tarrant and Harris counties. When it came to governing, the political climate was changing. As with most Democrats at the time, she supported increasing healthcare and education spending, which led to the Texas state lottery. However, when it came to guns, she did support reducing the number of assault weapons as well as regulating ammunition that was sold in the state. She was also strongly for gay rights, though she did sign into law a change to Texas's anti-homosexuality law, which continued to make certain acts illegal. The last 2 points are important because it was the beginning of a shift in American politics. Throughout the 1980s, the Moral Majority, a far-right Christian movement led by televangelist Jerry Falwell, which started in the late 1970s, eventually became a political power in the late 1980s, along with Ralph Reed's Christian Coalition. Both of these pushed their influence in Republican Party circles, with the party focusing significantly more on socially conservative issues more than ever before. In addition to the Christian movement, the National Rifle Association had also been pushing its agenda in the Republican Party. Previously, conservatives on Christian issues and the gun issue would be split evenly between Democrats and Republicans. But now voters who prioritize these issues, which were steadily growing, were starting to heavily favor Republicans. And with Texas being a gun-loving, socially conservative state, many saw Ann Richards as a threat to their way of life. One person who was able to notice the changing winds was the managing general partner of the Texas Rangers baseball team, George W. Bush. Now, George W. Bush is not a stranger to politics. He is the son of the former president, George Herbert Walker Bush, and a previous candidate himself. Back in 1978, he ran for Congress in Texas's 19th Congressional District, a race that I talk about in great detail in this video. But in brief, when Bush ran for Congress, he ran as a typical low-tax, big business conservative. Even though the district was socially conservative, Bush didn't run on those issues, instead focusing on his father's connections and his own business background. However, his opponent, Kent Hance, used Bush's father against him, saying that he was just a politically connected, nepotistic politician. But Bush would lose the election, only winning 46.8% of the vote, but that was a good showing in the traditionally strongly Democratic district. But shortly before Bush's first campaign, he had been arrested for DUI in Maine in 1976, which resulted in a small fine and a suspension of his driver's license in Maine. And during the rest of the 1970s and a good part of the 1980s, Bush continued to drink. But in 1985, after a meeting with televangelist Billy Graham, Bush decided to become a born again Christian and gave up alcohol. Bush would say that his religious awakening would lead to a personal and political transformation as well. One way to notice was the way in which he campaigned. Not to jump too far ahead, but his campaign style during the 1994 election was a mixture of a Christian message as well as focusing on tax cuts and helping businesses. In contrast, his brother Jeb, who was running for governor of Florida at the same time, almost exclusively stuck to fiscal issues during his campaign. You can watch more about that campaign in great detail in this video here. But George's message, which mixed Christianity and an entrepreneurial spirit, caught the reality of Republican politics at the time, which still focused on fiscal conservatism, but also recognized the emerging Christian right in Republican politics. Also, because he had been highly involved with his religion, he knew the religious lingo, being able to switch from sounding like a preacher to sounding like a businessman with ease. With that, let's look at Bush's business connections. Of course, he was well known because of his father, but he was also well known in Texas business circles, much like Jeb Bush in Florida. George established Urbusto Energy, which was an oil exploration company, as well as being an investor in a number of other companies related to the petroleum industry. Later, he would head a group of investors to take a controlling interest in the Texas Rangers, a baseball team based out of Arlington, Texas. On November 8, 1993, Bush announced that he was running for Texas governor. During his speech, Bush spoke about lower taxes, but also criticized Richards as being weak on crime. It wasn't an overtly aggressive speech, and Bush even went out of his way to say that this wasn't a personal battle, but a battle over issues and results. After his announcement, Bush set off on a 27-day campaign tour around the state. So, what were the main issues of the campaign? First, let's talk about education, since this was Richards' primary focus. As for Richards, she supported increasing funding for education as well as school consolidation that I mentioned earlier. As for Bush, he supported local control of schools, but also the concept of charter schools, public vouchers for private schools, and standardized testing of students, which he assumed would measure good and bad schools. On the issue of crime, Richards supported reducing the usage of the death penalty as well as focusing more on rehabilitation programs. As for Bush, he came across as a law and order Republican who strongly supported the death penalty as well as stronger sentences, especially for those who used a firearm during a crime. Bush would constantly attack Richards for being weak on crime. As far as government spending, Richards supported increasing spending on education, of course, as well as increasing taxes in order to fund education. As for Bush, he promised, like his father, that he would not approve any new taxes. He also supported dismantling governmental programs and moving many of the responsibilities over to the private sector, such as education. And finally, there were the social issues. Bush was pro-life, pro-gun, and socially conservative on almost every issue. As for Ann Richards, she was the total opposite. And as Texas was a socially conservative state, Bush had a strong connection to those who considered themselves socially conservative voters. Therefore, if we look at both candidates on the issues, they are basically the typical Republican versus the typical Democrat in the early 1990s. When it came to the Republican primary, George Bush didn't have any stiff competition, with Bush's opponent, Ray Hollis, only winning 6.68% of the vote. But when it came to the Democratic primary, the story was different. While Ann Richards easily defeated her Democratic opponent, Gary Espinoza from Palestine, Texas, Espinoza won 22.2% of the vote, showing that Richards might be vulnerable even amongst her own voters. As was mentioned at the start of the video, there were already warning signs for the Democrats, as the 1993 special election for the U.S. Senate and constitutional amendment on education showed a rough road ahead for Democrats in Texas. But still, in a poll before the primaries, Richards looked to be in a decent position. In the Texas poll conducted in the February before the March primaries, Richards was leading Bush, with Richards at 47% to Bush's 41%. When asked whether the voters approved of Richard's job as governor, 53% of Texans said that they approved, while 43% said they disapproved. Therefore, even with the worry in the 1993 elections, Richards did seem to be on solid ground going into the general election. Now, let's look at the campaign teams for both sides. First, let's look at the Bush campaign team because these names would eventually become well known after 2000. Bush's chief campaign strategist was Karl Rove. When it came to Rove's approach, he focused on making the Democrats look weak, especially when it came to crime. Contrary to popular belief, he wasn't a huge supporter of going all in on social conservative messaging. Instead, he wanted to strike a balance between all the issues of the campaign and not make Bush look like a single issue or single focus candidate. But still, the tone of the campaign was important as well. Karen Hughes, Bush's communications director, wanted to make Bush come off as compassionate while still being strict at the time. Bush's campaign saw how Clinton came off as compassionate during his 1992 presidential campaign, and they wanted to do the same. As a result, Hughes was instrumental in creating the compassionate conservative image. Hughes also made sure that Bush's message was non-confrontational, even when he was attacking Governor Richards. As far as the on-the-ground work, Bush's campaign manager was Joe Albaugh. Albaugh ran the day-to-day logistics of the campaign as well as devising field operations. All of these people would later go on to work in Bush's 2000 presidential campaign. As far as the Richards campaign team, most of them were the same team as in 1990, such as campaign manager Mary Beth Rogers. Therefore, while Bush was going to come off as the compassionate conservative, the Richards campaign wanted to continue with Richards' image as a strong, hard-nosed Texas Democrat. After the primary, signs were good for Richards. In a poll conducted in Lubbock County, a county that George's father won with 58% of the vote in a three-way 1992 presidential election, Richards was ahead 43% to 42%, showing Richards' strength beyond her bases. This was further confirmed by the Texas poll conducted after the primary between April 15th and April 23rd. When asked if voters had a favorable or unfavorable view of each candidate, Ann Richards' favorability rating was at 67%, with her unfavorable rating at 30%. As for Bush, his favorability rating was lower at 52%, but with 22% still undecided or didn't know enough about him. In the head-to-head matchup, Richards was beating Bush 47% to 39%, which was slightly inside the poll's margin of error. If things were to continue as they had been, then Richards was on her way to an easy victory. Early on in the general election, Richards decided to strike up the same tone that led to Bush's defeat in the 1978 congressional election, calling Bush a Johnny-come-lately candidate. At the Texas Democratic Party convention, Richards said elections attract people who, quote, suddenly pop out of a PR backroom claiming to have found a better way of doing everything, end of quote, with Richards further charging that Bush hadn't done anything for the state of Texas. With that, Richards was in attack mode against Bush at the very beginning. Also, Richards became one of the first candidates to start pushing identity politics, with a campaign highly focused on winning female voters. In June, when attending Texas Girls State in Austin, Richards said, quote, Prince Charming may be driving a Honda and he may be telling you that you have no equal, but that's not going to do much good when you've got kids and a mortgage, end of quote. While this was a play to win more female voters, the Bush campaign's response to it came off more compassionate, with Bush saying, quote, this is not the message Texans want their leaders to give our daughters and sons, end of quote. But things weren't going to be easy for Bush. In July, Bush said that he was unaware of MetLife, an insurance company that Bush owned stock in and was a director in, sold off life insurance policies that affected retirement and saving plans. Previously in the campaign, Bush criticized regulation, especially in the insurance industry, while Richards said that it was exactly the reason why regulation and regulatory oversight was needed. Bush tried to make this look like a state problem, while Richards made it look more like a Bush problem. Even with the two candidates sparring, both were able to bring in a lot of money. By July, Bush had already raised $3.7 million, having already spent $1.4 million of that. As for Richards, she raised $3.1 million, spending $1.75 million. Interestingly, these totals were significantly lower than what was spent in 1990, when Richards' campaign spent nearly $14.5 million, with Clayton Williams spending $21 million. And with most expecting this race to break fundraising records, a flood of money was expected to come between July and Election Day. But with that money came scrutiny. Of the 1.3 million raised by Richards, around 110,000 had been donated by gambling interests. Bush, sensing an opportunity, asked the governor to make her view clear as to whether she supported or opposed casinos in the state of Texas, an issue that Richards said should be left up to the voters. But for Bush, he had also taken money from Richard Rainwater, an investor in United Gambling, a casino and gaming machine company, around $100,000. Both candidates started attacking each other on the gaming issue, with the campaign tone on both sides becoming quickly negative. Also, in August, Richards started shifting her views on crime. Up until now, Bush had been making the crime issue front and center, stating that he would have tougher sentences as well as try minors as young as 14 years old as adults. Richards, who had previously supported rehabilitation for minors, was now becoming more stricter on the issue, supporting sentencing for minors as well. Bush had been shifting the Overton window on the issue throughout the election, which made Richards appear as more liberal. And with Richards being unable to shift on core liberal issues like abortion, crime was the one that allowed her some wiggle room. Still, her socially liberal views were still out of step with most Texans, with Bush continuing to paint Richards as out of touch with the average Texas citizen. When the Texas poll came out at the end of August, Bush had closed in on Richards, but she was still in the lead with 47% to Bush's 43%. Essentially, Richards' numbers were staying the same while Bush's numbers were increasing, showing that undecideds were now heading in Bush's direction. With the poll's margin of error at 5%, both candidates were in a dead heat. Still, the momentum, though slight, was favoring Bush, as Richards was stuck at 47% and not showing any gains. However, the same poll showed Bush behind Richards when it came to Hispanic voters by a 19% margin, a group that Richards won by a margin of 4-1 in the last election. Therefore, this wasn't a big enough gap to help her win. Both Bush and Richards campaigned in South Texas, with Richards continuing to attack Bush on her Johnny-come-lately charge, saying that Bush was only concentrating on South Texas to win votes. Still, with Richards campaigning in South Texas, a place that should easily be a stronghold for her, it indicated that all might not be well with her campaign. Richards further pushed by releasing a radio commercial in September, stating that Bush was only successful because of his family connections. The commercial said, quote, "He makes a big deal about running a baseball team. Fact is, he only owns a little more than 1% of the Rangers. Every business he's been involved with had to be bailed out by Daddy's friends. Seems like he always gets to start at the top. Now he expects to do the same thing in state government. Most people think we need a governor who really understands what a job is, and they're supporting Ann Richards." End of quote. The Richards campaign said that this attack ad was a response to a Bush radio commercial that said that Richards was connected to Washington bureaucrats who wanted to strip away Texans' property rights. Bush was furious with the ad, saying, quote, "How dare Ann Richards demean my family and my business partners with her negative commercial? She should be ashamed." End of quote. By this time, both campaigns were airing attack ads left and right. But one thing was clear. While Bush was attacking Richards' political record, Richards was almost solely attacking Bush personally, whether it be his family connections or his business practices. Rarely was Richards talking about her records on her positions or about the issues. When Bush charged Richards of flip-flopping on issues, such as on crime, Richards just went after Bush with another personal attack, not answering Bush's accusations. In the middle of September, Bush and Richards agreed to a debate on October 21st. The Richards camp felt confident that she could beat Bush in any televised debate. Up to this time, most voters knew the candidates only based on commercials on radio and television. The internet had not been a medium that was used for political advertising or fundraising yet. This televised debate would allow voters to see both candidates. And with it being assumed that Bush was a weak debater, with that skill in the family being dealt to Jeb, who was running for governor in Florida, the Richards campaign thought that it could give her momentum in the home stretch. As for Bush, he was reluctant to accept, but finally did so. Richards also said that she was open to having a debate on Larry King Live in front of a national audience, though the Bush campaign had yet to decide if they wanted to participate. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Texas became one of the first states to do early in-person voting, which started on October 19th, just 2 days before the televised debates. A day before early voting, a new Texas poll showed an extremely close race, with Bush now in the lead at 45% to Richards' 44%, dropping 3% from the 47% freeze that she previously had. Bush said that he was happy with the results, with Richards' campaign spokesman Chuck McDonald saying that the poll was skewed as it had polled too many men. When it came to the debate, many in the media said that it was essentially the same arguments that the commercials had been making for the last 4 months. Richards attacked Bush on his business record and saying that he was not qualified to be governor. As for Bush, he said that because he wasn't an elected official, that he was qualified to be governor, an argument that he actually made in his 1978 congressional race. Later in the debate, Richards would go on to say that she was the steady, experienced hand that could lead Texas over the next 4 years. Overall, Richards was seen as the winner of the debate, but she hadn't said or done anything that hadn't already been said or done before. It wasn't the knockout blow that Richards had expected. In the dying weeks of the campaign finance reports showed that Ann Richards' campaign had spent $5.6 million up to October 30th, with Bush's campaign spending $3.2 million. As Election Day approached, the election looked as if it was going to be a dead heat in which either candidate could sneak out the smallest of victories. And as with the previous weeks and honestly months of the campaign message from both campaigns hadn't changed. Richards was attacking Bush on his supposed business failures, family connections, and proposed government spending cuts, while Bush was labeling Richards as soft on crime and kneeling down to the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., putting the average Texan at risk. Bush also attacked Richards on her appointees to state government, saying that they were ethically challenged and showed ethical lapses in Richards' judgments, and some of those working in state government and appointed by the governor asked other state employees to attend campaign events hosted by Richards. The first indication that George Bush might win the election was from a kids' vote done by the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Of course, kids can't vote, but these types of votes usually indicate how their parents will vote. 10-year-old Woodway Elementary student Joy Simpson said, quote, "I voted for Bush because my parents voted for him. Also because he's the only one I like." End of quote. Out of the 55,000 students that cast votes in the mock election, Bush won 49% to Richards' 46% of the vote. But it wasn't just in the Texas classrooms where we see this shift. Republicans were poised to dominate national elections in 1994 and possibly take back the House, Senate, as well as a number of state offices. One state where Republicans were feeling quite confident was in Florida, where Jeb Bush looked to be in good position against incumbent Governor Lawton Chiles. As for his brother in Texas, it was close and anyone's game. But just 5 days before Election Day, former presidential candidate Ross Perot endorsed Ann Richards for governor and told his supporters from 1992 to vote for her in the general election. On the same day that Richards received Perot's endorsement, a Houston Post poll showed Richards with a slight lead over Bush, receiving 47% to Bush's 44%, which was still within the poll's 4% margin of error. But in the end, it was George who was the easy winner in Texas, with Jeb losing a close race in Florida. With over 4.3 million votes cast, just a few hours after the polls closed, Bush was declared the winner. Bush won 53.5% of the vote to Ann Richards' 45.9%. This was a significantly larger margin than anyone had expected. Still, in the editorial and opinion pages in the newspapers after the election, it seemed like many blamed her tone for the loss. Many saw her campaign as toxic and refused to vote for her simply based on the tone. My, how things have changed. With that, we've come to the end of today's video. I was hoping this election was going to have a few more twists and turns, but in the end, it really didn't. Ann Richards immediately went after Bush's personality, while Bush was laser focused on labeling Richards weak on crime. In the end, both of those combined to lead to Richards' downfall. Had Richards kept the campaign more positive and focused on her accomplishments, would she have won? Possibly, but we'll never know. If you would like to watch my video about George Bush's first campaign for Congress in 1978, check out this video here. If you want to watch about Jeb's run for governor in 1994, which is honestly a lot more interesting, you can check that out here. I will see you in the next video, and bye for now.